Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Adoption Happy Hour brought to you by NAAP. We are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, where it is our mission to elevate our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through connection, education, and awareness. I'm Marcie Keithley, your host for the evening, along with fellow board member Beth Story in the Zoom room helping out. I believe Jennifer is not going to be joining us tonight. So we're going to go ahead with a couple of announcements and we'll get started. We want to remind everyone that this is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. Portions of this event are recorded and may be shared on our private happy hour group on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. So if you don't follow us on Facebook, please check us out, Adoption Happy Hour. That's where Dr. Liz's replay will be listed. Please remain on mute, raise your hand or screen, raise your virtual hand to be recognized, and you're welcome to post questions and comments. If you are experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thought, please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988. Okay, Beth, what do we have?
Just a refresher about our regular programming that we have each month. Happy hour on the first and third Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Usually it's the third Tuesday of the month for Dr. Joyce's reunion group. And that was earlier this week, right? And then First Families, Amber now has a co-host. Amy Seek has joined her at hosting this program the second Thursday of the month. And then the last one we have yet coming up for September is Danielle Gaudette's Self-Love Essentials for the Adoption Constellation. And that will be coming up next week. And then pretty soon, all of the dates for October will be out. So you want to be on the lookout for that. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started then. I'd like to introduce our spotlight guest this evening. It's Dr. Liz DeBetta, and I'll go ahead and just give you a little information about her. She's an adoptee and independent scholar, artist, activist committed to changing systems and helping people navigate trauma through creative processes. She believes that stories are powerful change agents, and when we write them and share them, we connect and heal. She has presented nationally as well as internationally on topics ranging from adoption and reproductive justice, using writing to heal trauma, gender-based violence, and resisting colonial paradigms in higher ed. She is the former facilitator of Adoptees Connect in Salt Lake City, a Rudd Adoption Research Institute scholar, and spent 6 years teaching writing at Utah Valley University. She has published articles on adoptee narratives and has an award-winning one-woman show called Unmothered. Her book, Adult Adoptees and Writing to Heal, Migrating Toward Wholeness, is available from Brill Publishers. So let's welcome Liz to Happy Hour. Welcome, Liz. You want to go ahead and take yourself off mute?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so jazzed to be here. I've got so many people from different pieces of my life popping in. Allie from Australia. So we have an international audience this evening. And I do have a friend from Nigeria that was going to be popping in as well. So I don't know if she's here, but super cool. Just wanted you all to know that we are well represented around the world.
Yay! Well, I'm excited to have you on this evening. It was so good to see you in Nashville. We got to finally meet in person in Nashville at Operation Fog Lift. So that was a treat, and it was such a pleasure to see your one-woman play. Only I got to see it twice. So I got to see it 2 times.
Yeah.
So it was great. Yeah, the Operation Fog Lift was 2 days. So yeah, so welcome. Just go ahead and let's chat and share a little bit about your story and how you got here.
Yeah, well, I mean, my journey into adoption land has been interesting. It probably started in late 2016, early 2017, when that was sort of the beginning of me coming out of the fog and really starting this healing journey that I've been on since then. Because I had moved out of New York City where I was raised, and I had emotional and geographical distance from my family and like all of my, sort of comfort zone that I had had for most of my life, that I was afraid to leave for many, many years. And I think there's probably folks that can relate to that in the room. But I finally had the space to start to ask myself questions and then try to find the answers to those questions. And it started with a gift of a DNA kit from my partner that Christmas. And, like so many of us, I spit in the tube and put it in the mail. And then a day or so after that, I was in a Facebook group, one of the Facebook adoption groups that I first came across, and somebody posted an article from the state of New Jersey where I was adopted saying, hey, New Jersey's changed the laws. Now adult adoptees can have partial access to their records. And I was like, what does this mean? And so I was able to send away for a copy of my original birth certificate at that point. And there was a little bit of back and forth. It took me 3 attempts to get that information because the paperwork was very likely intentionally opaque. And there was always something that was missing until the 3rd time. And then I had to wait for them to mail the thing. And on my 40th birthday, I got a copy of my original birth certificate in the mail. And so that's that weird timing that the universe has sometimes, right? And so a couple of days later, I was able to make contact with my first mom, Mary, and I've been in reunion with her since then. And it's been mostly good. She was waiting for me to contact her. But the journey in and of itself has been really interesting. And I have connected with so many wonderful people in the adoption community like Marcie through the course of that. And at some time around then is when I started to learn about NAAP and other organizations that are being run by other adoptees or first parents or combinations of, and started to realize the richness of this community that we're all part of, and how this is a useful place for us to start to share our stories by connecting. And it helped me to figure out my own story. If I hadn't been a member of that particular group and I hadn't started reaching out to people in this community, I wouldn't have had the information to start to get to the answers to the questions that I had never been able to answer. And so, there's a lot of the story. That's like a tiny piece of it, but I'm gonna shift it back to you, Marcie, and see where we want to go next.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about, okay, so I know that we initially met at Summit, right? So how did you hear about Summit?
Most of my information comes from my connection to the groups online, right? And so I just stay connected through social media. And then I try to participate in as many of the online conferences and things that I can and stay connected to people and share information. So that's, yeah.
And you already had your book published at that time, and
yeah, the book was published in June, and so it's been a little bit of a whirlwind since then. And then right after that, we were preparing to do Operation Foglift, and then getting to be able to connect with people in person again and see the people that we had, that I have known virtually for so long.
So obviously we have the book and we have the one woman play, and you've been doing that, the play, for how long?
So the play came out of, was part of my dissertation work. So so this is a big part of my healing journey, was deciding in 2017 that I was going to go back to grad school and get a Ph.D. And it was sort of always a secret wish or desire that I had, but I never thought I would do it. And then I started to think about what I wanted and what was important to me in my life. And part of that came from some really deep and important discussions that I had with my partner about whether or not we really wanted to have children. And it was the first time that somebody had directly asked me that question. I had just taken for granted my whole life that that was a choice that I would make, that was what I wanted. And then I had to step back and go, oh, maybe there's something else. Maybe there's something different. And I had never, questioned the sort of patriarchal codes of what it meant to be a woman in this culture, right? And I also knew that I had this other part of my history connected to my first mom, and that story was still really murky. And I didn't know all of that yet. And I thought, well, I know that I can't, the whole kind of concept of motherhood and mothering was really fraught for me because I didn't know what it was like to be born, right? I didn't have my birth story. I didn't have that connection to the person who brought me into the world to be able to conceptualize myself in that way. But I wouldn't have thought of it except that at this point in time, my very wonderful partner who was able to be very honest with me and ask me important questions got me thinking. And then I was also thinking so much about my own story and what I needed in my life for the first time. And so when I got into my PhD study, I took a class on poetry and healing because I have been writing poetry for most of my life. I started writing poetry when I was 14 years old as a way of, getting out some of the stuff that I didn't know how else to deal with. I had a really smart teacher and coach who made that suggestion to me. And in fact, that's a story that I tell in the book because it was so pivotal. And I realized in taking this class that, excuse me, that I had been doing this thing of using poetry as a healing modality, as a therapeutic tool for most of my life. And I was like, okay, this is a thing. There's a whole field here, and there's all this really interesting research and all of this really interesting theoretical content that connects so much to my own experiences. And so I started to go down this path of well, I'm really interested in creative writing. I also have a background as a performer. My bachelor's degree is in theater, and I spent the first part of my, career and aspirational career goals being an actor. And I'm still a member of both of the professional actors unions. And as I got deeper into my thought process about what my dissertation was going to be, I realized that it was important for me to tell my story in a creative way, but in a performative way. And so what started out being a thought about writing a memoir became, I'm going to write a one-woman show. I had no idea I didn't know what it was going to be until I wrote it, like so many things. But and at the time, as part of that dissertation work, it was really important for me to tell the story as I needed to at that point in my journey. So the original version of that show is significantly longer and includes a lot more narrative text than the current version, which is now cut down to about an hour. And the current version relies very much on the poetry as the emotional glue in the narrative thread. And I think works really well because it's the story that I can tell now, having gone through a couple of years of, really good and important therapy, including EMDR, plus my own concurrently writing the story multiple times and in different ways and for different purposes, and publicly speaking about my story and my experiences. And so all of these things together have really helped me to get to this place where I am now. And that's, after all of that, that's where the book came from.
That's great. So these creative processes from the book to the one woman play, they really enriched your life and helped you on your healing journey to bring you to this place that you're at today.
Yes.
And I will say in the play, and I hope I'm not giving anything away, but I love the way the play opens. And I know that there's this exercise, and I don't know if you could even just tease us a little bit with that, just to give our audience an idea of how the play does open and the meaning behind that.
Yeah, so the play opens with a meditation for adoptees, which comes from Anne Heffron's memoir, You Don't Look Adopted, with permission. And it is a voiceover of me going through, all of the various body parts, and like, so these are the soles of my feet. These are my toes. These are the tops of my feet. These are my ankles. These are my shins. These are my calves. And at the same time of going, as you hear me speaking through this, I am silently touching all of these parts of my body and grounding myself in that opening moment of the play. And then immediately following that, the line is, be here. It's okay to be here.
Yeah, that opening was really beautiful, as well as the ending, but we won't give away the ending. So do you have anything else in the works right now outside? I mean, you're a pretty busy lady these days. So we've got a book, we've got play, we've got, and you do a lot of public speaking. So anything?
Yeah, so I'm working on continuing Operation Fog Lift with Rebecca Autumn, who is, many of you know, also who is the filmmaker for Reckoning with the Primal Wound. And we are committed to bringing that event to as many cities as possible. And we have plans and have been given a grant that covers most of the cost for us to bring it to New York. And our target for that is February. So there's that, that's sort of an ongoing collaborative project that is really important for us, because we see it as a movement, as a way of continuing to do the storytelling and literally lifting people out of the fog of adoption. And that's not just, that's like the general public as well, but that we need to start telling different stories, right? And then I have some writing that I'm doing. I'm working on a collaborative autoethnography with a colleague and friend of mine who teaches at Rutgers, and about identity and sense of home and belonging. And it's sort of going to be our very different but overlapping experiences as women. And of course, mine will be about my experience as an adoptee and navigating a sense of like how we find home in ourselves.
So the creative process for you has just been mind changing. I mean, life changing for you.
Yeah, I mean, I
was just saying, like, the timeline too, as far as when you began your journey.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about, I've a lot of my writing tells slightly different versions of the same stories very purposefully, because in different contexts they mean different things, or they have different import. But like in the book, I tell a lot of my stories as a way of sharing how creativity really saved my life in the years before I knew how traumatized I was and how much pain I was in, and where and why, right? For the first almost 4 decades of my life, I did not know why I was hurting all the time, why I couldn't have a good relationship, why I was afraid to move too far away from my family, why, all of the like millions of different like things that I started and stopped and couldn't finish had happened. But early on, the writing of poetry was really instrumental in giving me a voice and a place to say things that I couldn't say anywhere else, because those early years, I never shared any of that with anybody. It was a very secret thing. It was very private. It was not meant for anyone but me. But the thing that I did do publicly, I did a lot of theater starting when I was 14. And the ability for me to step into another character's life for a while and put all of the deep emotions that I had somewhere also saved me. I just had a conversation with someone yesterday about that. And I said, I don't know that I would be sitting here right now having this conversation if I had not had that creative outlet and the ability to do something with the things that I felt. And so that is why now, you know, all of these years later and after all of this study and all of this deep research and writing and working with other adult adoptees, I've done lots of workshops and I've offered lots of, you know, therapeutic writing circles. It's because I have this deep desire to not only continue my own healing journey, but to help other people heal. You know, we don't heal in a vacuum, and we don't heal if we can't access the places we've been told not to go into, right? There's an Anne Lamott quote where she says, in fact, it's in the book and I'm just going to find it and read it. How about that? And I picked the right page. It opens the first chapter, and the first chapter in the book is about rewriting the truth, making room for adoptee narratives. And Anne Lamott says, you can't get to any of these truths by sitting in a field, smiling beatifically, avoiding your anger and damage and grief. Your anger and damage and grief are the way to the truth. We don't have much truth to express unless we have gone into those rooms and closets and woods and abysses that we were told not to go into. When we have gone in and looked around for a long while, just breathing and finally taking it in, then we will be able to speak in our own voice and to stay in the present moment. And that moment is home.
Yeah, I think it's huge that when we reach that place that we sit in it, we just have to sit with it for a while. I know that's one thing I personally learned on my own journey, was to learn to sit with it and feel the emotions. And you just have to go to those places. There is no quick fix. There is no escape from it. It's just having the courage to take that first step and sit there. So what would you, I'm sorry, go ahead and finish your thought.
I was just going to say that's so true, but it's so hard to
taking that first step.
To take that first step for a lot of people, to feel safe enough, to feel to feel capable enough to have the space, you know, whatever that means. You know, like space is a sort of ubiquitous term for lots of different things. And also to, like, when you finally do take that first step, figuring out like really how to sit with that discomfort and understand what it feels like to feel, right? Because so many of us spend so much time dissociating and being so afraid of what we're feeling and not knowing how to express it appropriately. And so it gets misplaced and it gets misconstrued, you know, and we have to reorganize that. And that was a huge task for me, and continues to be, to remind myself when the feelings come up that big me is now capable of taking care of little me, who did not have access to any choice or control, little me who was constantly afraid. And so whenever little me acts up and is like, right, I can step back and realize what I need to do for that part of myself. But that was not something I could do for a really long time. And that's, you know, another big reason why it was so important to me to write this book, but also to continue to do my performance work and to continue to support other adopted people to figure out how to tell their stories. Because the effect of silencing is disastrous.
And I think too, another component there is community, and that is part of our healing journey is relying and leaning on our community when we need to, because it is a courageous choice to take that first step.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that, because I pulled a quote from the book that I wanted to share, and this is exactly
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
so perfect. And connected to what we've just been talking about. So probably about halfway through the book, one of the biggest benefits of writing our stories as adult adoptees is the reconnection to ourselves and the agency that comes from valuing ourselves enough to write and share our stories. When we examine the deepest parts of our interior selves by writing about them and analyzing that writing individually and in community with other adoptees, we begin the process of becoming more present with ourselves and others. The act of writing is an act of unlocking that can lead to profound life changes.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And when you were doing your writing, let's talk about that a little bit too, since you did mention that. And in your writing, what surprised you as you were writing? What did you find out that you thought you knew, but you didn't until you started to write?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So I'll go back to the writing of my when I was working on my dissertation, when I started writing Unmothered and was in the creative writing process for that. When I was writing the parts of my story about my first mother, a lot came up for me that I was not expecting. And like, I remember sitting in my apartment at the time and typing, and just like tears streaming down my face, and just thinking like, wow, okay, this is a lot. I'm not okay. Like I'll be, and just kind of like letting it all wash over me, and figuring, and saying what I needed to say, and then having to, again, like take a step back and process that moment of, okay, what just came up, and what is coming up for me, and like what, and it was a lot of grief, right? I realized at some point that it was grief that I wasn't prepared for around that, the loss of that lifelong relationship, and the loss of that connection, and also grief for her as a young woman who was really not given a choice, right? But made the best choice that she could in that moment, for a variety of reasons. Yeah, and then in the writing of the book, I think for me the most surprising thing was that I hadn't, a brief outline. I knew what each chapter was going to be about. I had, done all of the research and had all of my sources. And of course I had all of these poems and things that I was planning on incorporating in some way, shape, or form. I had lots of information from the Adult Adoptee writing group that partially informed the development of this book, and is a big part of the last part of the book. And I'm so grateful to my friends and people and the folks who have trusted me in that process, some of whom are here tonight. And as I was writing, just kind of organically, what happened was I turned to some of my older poetry from when I was a teenager, and I started to look at it, and I started to analyze it in a way that I had never done before as part of this process. And I started to realize things like, oh, none of the poems that I wrote from 1990 whatever until 2015 had titles, and it occurred to me, and I write it, I say it in the book, that none of the poems had titles because the poems were anonymous in the same way that I felt anonymous, right? And I didn't start giving titles to things that I was writing until I no longer felt silenced or anonymous in my own life, right? So that was like a big for me, that.
Wow, that's huge, huge. And what about the play? So as many times as you do the play, I would think that that takes an emotional toll on you and how you have to revisit that. Can you speak a little bit to that and how you handle that every time you perform?
Yeah. So I will talk about it in the context of then and now. So the first time that I did it, which was, as I said, part of my dissertation, and I had, well, let me back up a second. So part of the process for the play, not just the writing of it, but the rehearsal process of it, was something that has been really instrumental in managing the emotional overload, let's say, or like the potential for emotional overload. My partner is a very skilled theater teacher. He teaches voice, and one of the voice techniques that he is trained in is called Fitzmaurice voice work. And it is, when the right person is doing it, it is a very trauma-informed approach to breath and body work for actors and performers and speakers. And we intentionally used that in the rehearsal process as a way, and there's this whole destructuring, restructuring thing, which is a whole other conversation, you know. And if you think about like my journey as an adopted person, and a lot of adopted people, that we have to like deconstruct parts of ourselves in order to reconstruct them. And so like for that reason, it felt really natural, like a natural thing to move into. But also what it does is it creates the ability to connect the breath and the body in a way that allows for like physical chaos to be going on, but to still feel really grounded and able to connect to the text. And he's in the audience, so he could probably say more about that later if he wants to, because I don't know that I always explain it in the most coherent way for folks, but that's my experience of it. And my experience of it when we first went through the rehearsal process was that I was at a different point in my journey, and a lot of the rehearsal process was very physical, and relied on doing this breath work in order to work through the really difficult parts of the text. And just like, you know, doing a solo performance for an hour and a half, at the time it was an hour and a half long, that is a lot of vocal and physical and emotional output, right? But physically, like we would get done with rehearsal and my body would hurt. And I write about it in my dissertation. Like I could feel the trauma moving as a result of being able to speak this story out loud and physicalize it in some way, and give life to the things that had lived inside me but had never been expressed. And so that was part of my dissertation, was to sort of prove that we can use theater as a healing, like theatrical storytelling in this way, as a healing modality, but also as a way, you know, as a way of moving embodied trauma. And so lots of you who have heard me speak before, and the book is very much about this. I talk a lot about, you know, this idea of migrating the embodied trauma and moving it through creative processes. This was one way to do that. And I would say at that point in time, it took a lot more for me to do that work. And my parents came to the first performance of the show, and that was like a whole other thing because there was a whole lot of really difficult conversations that had been happening for probably a year prior to me actually getting on stage and like doing this final piece of the dissertation work, because they didn't really understand what I was doing. They, I had to explain a lot of things to them. So there was a lot of like extra emotional labor. Fast forward now, 3 years later, I took the show to the United Solo Theater Festival in New York last November, so almost a year ago. And at that point in time, and I say we, my partner and I, reinvested in the rehearsal process, and we revised the script and took out some things. And he was really helpful in reorganizing some of it in a way to reflect what it needed to be now. And also that we had a time limit at the theater festival. And so we were like, well, we can't, we've got to make sure we have 75 minutes. It's got to be less than that. And that's a good thing, because I think the current version is really impactful in a different way. And it's the story that I can tell now, because some of those other things are not as important anymore. And the experience of telling that story now feels different. It feels more liberating. I do not have an emotional hangover afterwards. But it is exhausting. I will say that doing it twice in a row in Nashville was a lot for me, particularly in a small and intimate space, particularly because depending on the context, like like the stakes are different depending on who's in the audience. There's, and a big part of it for me at this point is not just that it's my story, but that I know that so many other people find themselves in it and connect to it. And so it's like, that's the thing now that feels really, what's the word I want? Like important, right? And so I also do a really good job of taking care of myself and like knowing that after I do this, like I'm gonna go to a float therapy session, or I'm gonna sleep late, or I'm gonna do something that is nourishing to me outside of that.
Okay, and another question I had was, speak to your audience here. So let's say, what advice would you give someone who's just beginning their creative writing, or what they choose, how they choose to express themselves? What advice would you have for them?
So I often say this in different contexts of writing workshops that I facilitate, which is that there are no rules, just write, WRIT, right? So many people get so hung up on like, oh, but I'm not good at it, or I don't know how to do this. You don't know how to do something until you do it, right? And there are no rules. Like there's no right way or wrong way. It's your story, and your story matters. And the way that you choose to tell it is the way that you choose to tell it, because nobody else is you, and nobody else can tell the story that you have to tell. And so like, I think there's some freedom in allowing yourself to take that time for you to say, well, what do I need to say? Right. And to imagine, whether you share it with someone else or not, like, who do you want to hear it? Right. So you think about your audience, like maybe you just need to tell it to your little self, right? Maybe this is a story you need to tell younger you, or maybe this is a story that, maybe it's excuse my language for a second, but maybe it's a fuck you to fill in the blank, right? Because there's a lot of anger that we don't get to express either. So I think identifying whatever the emotion is that you feel like you most need to move, and then giving yourself permission to just write and not censor yourself. Because, geez, you know what? We've been censored enough.
Yeah, right. Like no one's going to read it, and
That's right.
That way you can get everything out. You always have time to edit. Right, like no one will ever read it but yourself is the best way.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit, going back to the play again. Do you have I mean, are you booked? Do you have future plans for taking the play where?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if anyone wants me to come do the play, reach out. I'm open to that. We are, as I said, we are planning on bringing adoption Operation Foglift to New York City, probably in early February. I might try to figure out how to do a performance somewhere locally here. I'm in Michigan. In the Detroit metro area. I might try to figure out if I can find a spot to do a performance here for National Adoption Month. And then, yeah, I don't have any firm plans for bringing it anywhere other than that at the moment, but I am certainly open to getting some dates scheduled and bringing it to some communities for sure. And, yeah.
And you're teaching creative writing, right? Some workshops to help others.
Yeah, so I'm not currently in a teaching position at the University of Michigan, but I do teach and facilitate workshops on the side for folks. I will be doing a couple workshops upcoming at conferences, and I will be at the AKA conference doing a workshop that is based on one of the chapters in my book. And that will be, hang on, let me find my calendar. Calendar. November, I'm gonna say the 4th. November 3rd. So Friday, November 3rd. I will be doing a workshop for AKA, but I'm also open to, that's another thing that I'm thinking about right now is getting some regular offerings on the books now that some things are a little bit more settled and the book is actually published because that took some time. And you can put my website in the chat so that if folks want to look at some of the topics and reach out, you can do that. Because also, like, if folks have requests, right? If somebody reaches out and says, oh, I really want you to do this, expressing the primal wound workshop, can you set one up? And then I'll just pick I'll pick a weekend and I'll put out the request, I'll put out the announcement and see who shows up.
And let's go revisit your story a little bit. You want to share with us where you are currently in Reunion without giving anything away?
Yeah. So let's see. As I said, I connected with my first mom in 2017, and her name is Mary. She still lives in New Jersey, very close to where she grew up. And when I first reached out to her, she wrote back to me and said, I've been waiting for this day for 40 years. And I'm so glad you reached out to me. I'm so glad you found me. And when we started talking, she told me that she had gone back to her maiden name after her divorce so that it would be easier for me to find her. And so she's been really open and communicative in many ways. She, has her own deeply embedded trauma from lots of life circumstances, including an abusive marriage. But it's been interesting to me to sort of, as I get to know her over the years and hear more of her stories and understand more about her life, to kind of see some of the parallels, and that we were both in abusive marriages, and like look at those things and go, oh, okay, and sort of think about the way that epigenetic trauma works and the way that we carry those things with us, and the importance of disrupting those cycles and those patterns. And so we have a good relationship. We know that we can call or text each other anytime. It's sort of like, open-ended. There's no formality there. And often like when it's difficult because like we don't talk all the time, and it's hard to develop a relationship with somebody who didn't raise you, but who you feel really connected to. And, you know, try to hold that at the same time that I'm holding the complexity of my other relationships to me, you know, with my adoptive family who really try to understand, but sometimes just don't get it. And sort of the disruptions of that and the ways that that reunion, like for me, is really fraught, you know, that I want to have more of a relationship, but it's hard to do that because of distance, because of time, because of her own trauma, and recognizing that like sometimes I also don't have space. And so I have to give myself grace around like what's my capacity level for engaging. And sometimes it's very small, and that's okay, you know.
Okay. And how important was it for you as an adoptee to hear that your birth mother had been waiting for this day for 40 years and had made a change in her name just so you could find her? I mean, can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I mean, it's like hugely validating, right? Like, and also, and I'm not sure if this piece of story ended up in the book or not, but it is in a couple of other pieces of writing that I've done. I have written about this in terms of like, I always knew she would want to know me. That is a conviction that I have had my whole life, even for the many, many years where she was this ghost person, right? Where I had like an idea of her, but that's it. She was an idea. She wasn't like a fully formed person. She only became a fully formed real person when I got the copy of my birth certificate in the mail and I saw her name, and I remember turning to my partner Jeremy and I was like, she's real. Like she has a name. Like she's a real person. And then like by extension, I'm a real person, right? For the first time, like I felt real to myself because I could put a name, and then I was very quickly able to put a face to that name and to start to you know, integrate that missing piece. And so when she did write back to me, I was relieved and validated, and also not really surprised, but it like I was able to like further trust myself because it was that thing that I had known, right? I had like just that inner knowing of like, I know that she's going to want to know me. And then when she said, I have wanted, you know, I've wanted this for so long, then it allowed me to start to be able to trust myself in ways that I hadn't been able to either. So that's the big impact there.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. I knew that was important to you, and I wanted others to hear that. Okay, so we're getting close to the 8 o'clock hour where we're going to open it up for questions from all of you. But Dr. Liz has decided that she would like to give an autographed copy of her book away. So I think, Beth, have you pulled out a name yet from the attendees this evening? It's a nice little surprise, guys, right?
Beth, you're on mute.
There we go. I was clicking it twice. Yes, I have. And the winner is Tina Brown.
Tina!
Did we lose Marcie? Yes, Tina. I don't know if you're on camera or not, but I know I saw you a minute ago. So how are we going to facilitate this? She gives us her information.
Yeah, if you will get her address, I will, and then share that with me. I can, or if Tina, if you're comfortable private messaging me that information, I will get that in the mail to you.
I would be happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
For a moment, so I didn't hear everything. That was Tina. Tina was the winner. Okay, Tina Brown.
Yes, Tina was the winner.
Okay, well, that's all from me for this evening. We're going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. If you would, please, if you've got a question for Dr. Liz, go ahead and raise your virtual hand for me.
I do see a
we'll go ahead
request
and
in the
call on
chat for a poem from Alethea. So maybe before we go to the questions, I can indulge
Sure.
that. Let me just